All right, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to USC. My name is David Kang. I'm the director of the Korean Studies Institute here at USC, and it's a delight to see all of you. It's a delight to have the Consul General here, Professor Kim. I'll introduce them in a minute. We're here to have a discussion about sort of next steps on the Korean Peninsula, because there has been a tremendous amount of activity going on over the last year or two. And so we're delighted that you're here to join us. What we are going to do is have introduction by a sort of welcome remarks from the Consul General in just a minute, a couple presentations. I will moderate between our own group and then take some Q&A. We're going to try and emphasize students first, because this is a university, so some of you, if you are students, I expect you to be asking questions. A couple housekeeping things. We are live streaming this, so if anyone has a friend or mom who isn't here, would like to watch, the link is on the KSI Facebook and I think Twitter feed. Is that correct? So you can watch, or those who you can send a link to someone else. But we are delighted to have the Consul General from Korea here, Mr. Kim Won-jun, as well as Professor Kim Youngjun from the Korea National Defense University, and then John Park, who is from the Kennedy School. He's director of the Korea Working Group at the Kennedy School. All of them are really well known, so I'm looking forward to something very exciting. I will just point out I've sort of asked both Professor Kim and Dr. Park to talk around 15 minutes. I will be giving them a yellow card or a red card if they so we keep in time so that we can have a lively discussion. But first, please join me in welcoming Consul General Kim.
Very good afternoon, professors and Korean experts and ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute honor and privilege to speak at this prestigious university on the occasion of a seminar titled "What's Next for Korean Peninsula?" Frankly speaking, I don't think there is anyone who speak and dare to jump into the conclusion what's coming next on the Korean Peninsula. For that reason, I think it is high time for us to have a seminar like this. And before I begin, I'd like to introduce a little bit about myself. Until last December, before my coming here to the LA, I was working as a consul general in Seoul. For the consular affairs and overseas Koreans. This time around in October, many ambassadors in Seoul, based in Seoul, they came to my office asking about what and how Korean government was going to help. In evacuating their citizens out of Korea. Faced with the imminent threat of war in Korea. And then now, a year, compared to a year ago, the mood is dramatically changed. In a sense, we are at the dawn of a new day. To paraphrase it, we are now dreaming about real possibility of a breakthrough for the complete denuclearization and lasting and permanent peace regime on the peninsula. But the problem is there is still widespread skepticism as to whether this time is going to be different, given the North Korea's the track record for the last 3 decades. And surely there are several reasons to be skeptical, but also strong signals to be positive as well. I am not going to repeat and summarize all the consequences and commitment of the U.S.-North Korea summit and 3 inter-Korean summit and all other the succeeding ministerial and working level negotiations. But allow me to explain why this is the best chance to solve the issue in 3 points. First, this milestone development development on the peninsula have been initiated by North Korean leader himself, not by working level officials, the dislike in the past. He promised to change the course and coming forward out of the isolation. And second, North Korea is committed to accepting inspectors to the nuclear test site in Punggye-ri and the permanent and the irreversible dismantlement of the Yeonbyeon nuclear facility. It is totally different from the disablement. Disablement they proposed at the beginning of 2000. So thirdly, the international community's, the waterproof sanctions regime remains intact, remains in place. From my personal experience working with the National Security Council, dealing with the North Korean nuclear issues a decade ago, so I think when it comes to the nuclear issue, it always involves three dimensions. First, declare existing weapons and weapons program thoroughly, and unfettered inspection and verifications to all nuclear facilities. And third, ultimate dismantlement and security guarantees in return for it. These three dimension involves all the time when we talk about the nuclear issue. So it means without reciprocal trust building measures from all parties concerned, the denuke process would actually lead to nowhere with just a verbal commitment. That is why we attach a lot of importance to the declaration to end the Korean War in response to measures taken and committed and promised by North Korea. In addition, the President Moon stated the U.S. troops in Korea will continue to stay even after signing of peace treaty and eventual unification on the Korean Peninsula, let alone declaration to end the Korean War. So in today's seminar, I hope for a fruitful discussion on what should be done in the next stage regarding declaration to end the Korean War, as well as on the U.S. initiative and strategy to reach an end goal of complete denuclearization, which would be the crucial factor in the hard and excruciating road ahead. So I also wish today's seminar to be the reinforcing venue for the early realization of second U.S.-North Korea summit. And before my closing, I gotta recognize my special thanks go to Professor David Gang, who arranged this event, and also the Professor John Bak and Youngjun Kim for attending here today. So I hope the fruitful discussion to be held. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll turn right now to Professor Youngjun Kim. You can stay here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't want to get red card, so I'll speak on the very shortly on 10 minutes and more like question and answer time, free discussion, especially this beautiful campus. Actually, I was coming here. I'm coming here today for the first time to visit beautiful USC campus. I was studying actually in Kansas, the University of Kansas, Lawrence, Jacob-town, small beautiful college town, but it's totally different from here. So I have a very good impression when I visit here this morning. All right. Actually, from my conversation, we'll start my book, actually published last year. The book title is The Origin of the North Korean Garrison State, People's Army and the Korean War, which is focusing on the how to Kim Il-sung regime to start his garrison state and maintain his garrison state. It's focusing on how to survive North Korea for 7 decades. So my focusing is on the Kim Il-sung's political strategy, how he created his middle class to support his regime. So I actually investigated a lot of North Korean document which is located in College Park, Maryland, National Archive, and I look at a lot of the documents, including letter, diary, or personal note of young North Korean ordinary people, where many people ignore so far. We only focus on the top leadership story, including Kim Il-sung or Park Geun-hye or Lee Seung-man or kind of guy. We already know what Haruki or Bruce Cummings, a lot of good people already investigated. But I want to introduce forgotten people of young North Korean ordinary people. At the time, I looking at their personal letter and note and a lot of things, especially most of us studying at the time in the Soviet Union, who got opportunity to study abroad, and then they are not just studying in industry or military, but at the same time dancing or the other thing as well. So 100,000 young North Korean people got a chance when they didn't have a kind of a chance under the Japanese colonial period. So they have a lot of poor family background. They're young children of poor North Korean peasant. So they want to be a good middle class manager position after finishing their study. So this is a very good opportunity for them to be a North Korean new version of middle class. So this kind of guy is almost the 30 or 40% of the whole North Korean population. So I think it's time to change our view on totalitarian school on North Korean. North Korean is not just 1% and 99% society. We believe North Korea 1% Chae Ryong-hae or Kim Jong-un always push 99% and 99% of North Korean people always cry and fear police investigation or something like that. That's not simple. North Korea is, when you look at the Pyongyang citizens who have a cell phone, maybe 3 to 4 million people who enjoy their life, because their quality of life is much worse than the US or South Korea. But anyway, they enjoy relatively a much better life than the other North Korean people who live in countryside, especially bottom 10% class. So my book is that kind of try to introduce North Korea is not just a dictatorship country, but at the same time, some of them benefit from this new society as well. So this is the implication for the Kim Jong-un's regime, how to he start his reform or his political strategy when he became the chairman. So I published my book last September, and I got a chance to attend the Asian Regional Forum, which is the 1.5 track or 1 track, and right after the 6 nuclear weapon tests, North Korean 2-star general would like to come at the time for the first time. North Korean guy never been there. So I was the kind of representative of the Ministry of National Defense of the Republic of Korea. At the time, I and Japanese representative and American representative openly blamed North Korean nuclear tests, naturally. But at the same time, North Korean representative, 2-star general and 1-star general, never officially talk about the name of country, the United States and Korea and Japan, when they blame the other countries from their position. And even they didn't have any kind of security guard or intelligence guy behind of them. Naturally, they always have a kind of guy when they have a foreign conference in Geneva or Vienna or in New York. But at the time, just right after 6 nuclear weapon tests, I feel like they changed their attitude. They looks like they have already confidence or something like that, because finalization of nuclear weapons almost reached at the time, and then they looks like always smile and say to me, sir, have a great food, enjoy your meal or something like that. It's totally different from the North Korean military general. that we have. So actually, I think it's their attitude already changed. So I got a chance to advise on the president office. We call in Korean 국정상황실, chief of staff room to Mr. Youngjun or to Mr. Im Jong-seo. I proposed them maybe Kim Jong-un will start now his reform or kind of open strategy because he wants to stay as long as possible as a young dictator. So he wants to get wide political support from North Korean version of a middle class who enjoy their life near Pyongyang area, maybe 3 or 4 million guys. So maybe he opened kind of another direction now. And also same time, as a young reform leader in the North Korean political, social and cultural context, Kim Jong-un maybe want to independent politically, economically and psychologically from China, right? So we already know a lot of story from Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un, how much they want to be independent, not just from the US, but from China. We already know Minsengsdang incident, maybe some of you understand, during the Japanese colonial period. Kim Il-sung, a lot of humiliated by China and Soviet Union during the Korean War. We now know Soviet Union want to use the Korean War for its national interest to delay the war in Europe by using those Korean Chinese bloody, right? So now the recent center or kind of a Shenjua kind of scholar already discovered this kind of story. So this very strong influence in Kim Il-sung, and when actually the United States introduced tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea, 1956 or 7, actually Kim Jong-il withdrew Chinese PLA. So this is doesn't make sense in the military term, but actually he wants to be really independent because of his experience, personal experience in Minsengsdang incident of the Korean War. Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il also as well. Kim Jong-il, remember, when famine, a lot of North Korean people died. We already know millions of people died during the 1990 because of shortage of food. But China, what was doing China when his neighbor starving and died? We need to talk about that, right? But not many studies focusing on the why China do kind of nothing to do to help North Korea during the 1990. But they provide some support, but at the same time. So my advice is not just the studying of the nature of Kim Il-sung regime or Kim Jong-il regime, but propose maybe Kim Jong-un start new kind of strategy now. So before Trump meeting with President Moon Jae-in, I supposed to the kind of proposal to the President office on the how to use this kind of Kim Jong-un's passion and path to the independent for our interest and for American interest, and maybe some part of the classified document, but yeah, and then we'll start kind of a new strategy from the Pyeongchang Olympic. So I would like to say denuclearization is not the final goal of three leaders from my point of view. Denuclearization process is kind of one of the process to reach what? Making of a new Northeast Asian world order, right? If we three countries have a kind of a goal to make or change Northeast Asian order, denuclearization is kind of one of the steps, not the goal. So everybody, including my close colleague, always criticize how can he reach the goal of denuclearization? That's important. But at the same time, North Korean regime, South Korean regime, and America have another grand strategy. Okay. So we need to understand the nature of why Trump so believe Kim Jong-un, even though doing nothing in action, especially regarding the denuclearization process, and why Moon Jae-in looks like so naive or innocent, but it does not. Moon Jae-in of the administration have another grand strategy. So when you look at the President Moon Jae-in speech at the Russian Eastern Economic Forum or something like that, he suggested railway project, right? And another gas pipeline project we call super grid initiative or something like that. So President Moon Jae-in also want to have a more grand strategy, not just nuclear weapon thing. Nuclear weapon is still important. At the same time, this government and North Korea as well want to create the new order of Northeast Asia in the end. And this is good for North Korea, this is good for the US, and this is good for the South Korea, and this is not bad for China. So maybe we can have a kind of conversation after my presentation, more friendly. And I'd like to finish my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Really interesting. And I think that point needs to be emphasized, that denuclearization isn't necessarily the end goal. It's part of a much larger process. So very interesting comments. Thank you. We'll now turn to Dr. John Park.
Thank you. I'd like to begin with my thanks to the Consulate General of Los Angeles and to the Korean Studies Institute. It's always great to be back in Los Angeles and USC. I wanted to present some of the recent findings from the ongoing research that we are doing with the policymakers, the policy advisors, and specifically from some of the recent research trips to Beijing, Washington, and Seoul. So in addressing this question, it was very helpful to hear this historical context and some of the contemporary developments inside of North Korea from Professor Kim. I wanted to add some of these other strands to it. And in addressing the question of what's next for the Korean Peninsula, I wanted to look at two factors that are really driving the process as an analyst piecing together some of these political factors. Then look at some of these expectations, three core expectations, and then move into a bit of a panel discussion here. So clearly what we're seeing is, as Professor Kim mentioned, the idea of denuclearization as a process. You know, as much as it is discussed as a goal, as we observe the different policy makers involved in the overall game plan here, it is to put this very difficult, complex issue of denuclearization into a mechanism that can be credible and that could be something that would lead to especially outcomes that we could all agree to, but with timelines and the details deferred to later on. And so the first factor is very much this idea that we are in the midst of a political versus a technical process. One way to characterize the previous efforts to deal with denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and dealing with North Korea was a technically driven process of looking at this idea, as we heard from Consul General Kim, a declaration of all the facilities, and then this idea of a verification inspections regime, and then the idea of what kind of security guarantee. That was the formula, and that was very much a technically driven formula. Because of large gaps in that technical process, we had a lot of breakdowns in those previous efforts. So with this, one, I think, clear piece of evidence that we are in this mode of a political process is that the gaps in the definition of denuclearization between the core countries are tremendous, yet they have not proven to be this debilitating obstacle. To me, that shows that this continues to be a political process that is very much top-down. We're talking about leader level. So in the North Korea-South Korea context, we've had 3 summit meetings. In the Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un dynamics, we've had 3 meetings. We've already had one between President Trump and Chairman Kim, and there's an anticipated second right around the corner. This has been happening in less than 12 months. I think that has become the new normal, but from an analyst who's been looking at this for a number of years now, there has been a tremendous amount of activity at this top-down type of level. So something clearly is different with this, and the political process continues to be one that overshadows any of these differences on the denuclearization. So we have differing definitions, and also this idea of whether it's going to be sequential or simultaneous. Those gaps in the past have led to the halting of any type of engagement or negotiations in North Korea, but that still remains to be the gap without any type of immediate impact on the overall process. The second factor, and this is no surprise, but this is a process that is largely driven by the Moon Blue House, and this is something that we saw at the beginning of this year. With the context of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, you had the Moon administration using a lot of political capital and moving very quickly to use this international gathering as a way to get high-level North Korean delegations to South Korea. And importantly, we get to see the early instances of not the lifting of sanctions, but the practice of exemptions on sanctions. I think that's a critical piece to look forward because the United States stance is very firm that there will be no lifting of sanctions. But I think as ad hoc measures, I think we will see more of these type of exemptions to sanctions in a key sense to keep the overall political process moving. The other element is with the Panmunjom Summit and the resulting Panmunjom Declaration, there is now a blueprint. And if you see the summits, there's always a linkage. Irrespective of who the leaders are, there's a reference back to the Panmunjom Declaration. And if you look at that Panmunjom Declaration, there is a big focus on something that is not nuclear in nature, and the idea of transportation infrastructure projects, economic development projects. Now those are very similar to previous inter-Korean agreements, but in its operation, what is different is a credible effort to try from the South Korean side to develop these type of partnerships to make this as an ongoing type of venture, as opposed to a one-off payment or some sort of idea that this is a one-time transaction. So this is the idea of the inter-Korean partnership that we've observed from a number of angles from the South Korean side. For a lot of analysts outside of Korea, that is a source of great concern. The idea that you are giving away the incentives, you're giving away all the carrots without any credible movement on the denuclearization piece. So we see more of the idea of what kind of balanced equation there is, and a default again to the technical analysis. From a technical point of view, there is a great deal of deferment of the results of denuclearization to much later on in the process when it comes to the core components of North Korea's nuclear weapons program itself. But again, I have to emphasize that the political process is something that has not only been a dominant force to where we're at right now, but a piece that will continue to grow. And from this, let me transition to three core expectations and then move to the group discussion. The three expectations ahead, as we've pieced together from these different interactions in the capitals and among the different analysts, first is this pace of engagement at the high level has already been fast, but it's going to accelerate even more. And there is a sense of urgency now. Before, there was a definition of the 2 years ahead, and that was usually tied to the idea that there's 2 years left in the Trump administration. But with, I think, expectations that there will be greater internal challenges in the United States with midterm elections going on and so forth, and the concern that the ability to move quickly will somehow be impeded, I think that is one key element for expectations ahead that will fuel the effort to get the second Trump-Kim summit happening very soon. And I think the expectation right now is it's going to be either immediately after the midterm elections here in the United States. Then this leads to the second point, and the critical element of a second Trump-Kim summit, which be a declaration announcing the end of the Korean Peninsula. For many analysts of this type of dynamic, there seems to be too much emphasis on a document that doesn't have any legal bearing. This is a clear differentiation. This is not a peace treaty, a type of peace treaty that would require ratification in the Senate. There is a sense that in terms of the time available, it is quite unlikely to get any type of movement on a peace treaty itself. And also the certainty of who would sign it and all the different elements of the peace treaty. Hence the political document of a declaration announcing the end of the Korean War. Now the question is, why is this so critical? This is something that has been front and center from a North Korean bargaining position, and also something that has been supported very strongly by the Moon Blue House. I think as you hear the different viewpoints, and for those North Korea watchers in Beijing, in Seoul, and in Washington, those who've been looking very carefully at the internal dynamics really do come to this conclusion based on their analysis of statements and decisions made by Chairman Kim domestically, that he is reorienting from the Pyeongjin focus on developing nuclear weapons now to a new line, which is about light industry, about economic improvement, but not as a one-off, but as a long-term project that needs to be jump-started quickly. And in order to do that, Chairman Kim needs to line up a lot as this analysis goes. The factors here in terms of this internal game plan really focus on the idea of declaring the end of hostilities in order to move finite resources away from the military into this light industry focus. And so having this type of declaration in hand, especially from the President of the United States, is a critical element. The other aspect that is important from an internal perspective, as I think this group of analysts point out, with the declaration of the end of the Korean War, it then facilitates an opportunity to move more quickly also in the Panmunjom Declaration. So with that blueprint, the two Koreas can enter into a new type of relationship. And we've already seen the glimpses of this. This is something that is largely not highlighted enough, but it is dramatic to see a section of the demilitarized zone cleared and demining to happen so quickly. And the realization, again, that demining of the totality of the demilitarized zone would take many years, but for the sake of urgency, to get a glimpse of what more in store could be available. So from that perspective, using that as a corridor to do more of this type of commerce between the two Koreas serves an important type of private sector logic, that this isn't just a security settlement. The third expectation ahead, and this one is a little counterintuitive. As much as the inter-Korean dynamic has been framed as steps towards reunification, that clearly is a longer-term goal. But if you play out the game plan of the Panmunjom Declaration, the two Koreas are able to do what they seek to accomplish. You actually see the reunification part of it deferred much more to the future, because the immediate results would be a stable and prosperous North Korea with the help of South Korea and other countries. So this would lead to the idea of peaceful coexistence. And so you have a prolonged division of the Korean Peninsula, but not the type of instability of security challenges that cyclically seem to boil up again, but one where peaceful coexistence lead to essentially trading partners and countries that are very much in the mode of mind of mutual prosperity. So let me conclude with one piece in terms of the expectations aspect going forward. When you do look at the overall analysis of this, it's very important to assess when analysts are critiquing the situation. First and foremost, are they doing it with the idea of political metrics or technical metrics? And that's one way to get a sense of why there's such a big difference in terms of the assessments. For those who use the technical basis, it's a very pessimistic situation, and it looks like another type of using the nuclear issue to ratchet up tensions to get concessions, but retain the nuclear weapons in its totality and have a recycling of this type of crisis and a deferment of that. Those on the political side are noting that this is a different type of process that we're in, and that as a result of a new process with a tremendous amount of political capital, there may be new results. So keep your focus on those two pieces going forward, because they're happening in tandem, and really in terms of the next steps ahead, this is an element of the leaders as they hammer out these type of agreements and different aspects of these agreements going ahead as well. Thank you.
Great. That's both of these were wonderful, wonderful presentation. Right on time, very good, good boys. And so I think we'll talk among ourselves for a bit, and then we'll open it up to the audience, because I want to ask a couple of questions, which is pretty clearly both of you noted that this process is being driven by Korea itself, which is really dramatic in a lot of ways, and even from North Korea being driven in ways that we haven't seen in the past as much. So I'd like both of you, if you don't mind, to first take a cut at what are the implications then for the U.S. ROC alliance, because there's some people are very skeptical about this in a number of ways. So I wonder, Professor Kim, if this is how you see the U.S.-Korea alliance moving forward, or is this a challenge, or is this a real opportunity to upgrade it? And then, Jonathan, what do you think?
When I have a presentation yesterday at the University of California, San Diego, there was the retired admiral, Solicitor General Robert, and he asked me what about the especially young generation of Korean after a kind of peace treaty or peace regime. Maybe they ask kind of a question, why we still need ROC-US alliance, especially focusing on military resistance and US Army in Korean Peninsula. Why we need it? Kind of question will be alliance. How do you think about that? So my answer is technically is the most of Korean has a kind of consensus. We anyway still need a kind of a US alliance, absolutely, and some part of the US Army. And technically, maybe we think about it. If we have a kind of 250,000 grounded forces in Korean Peninsula, this is the only way to have a US FK in Korean Peninsula. No, maybe we can have an Air Force, Navy, and small number of ground forces that mean the same. Or if we move to Pyeongtaek, U.S. base to Busan and Jeju, and smaller number of the ground forces, is that the end of U.S. Army staying in Korean Peninsula? No. So we have a kind. You can have a kind of variety of view of the existence of the U.S. Army as well. And I might guess maybe we can have another enemy after finishing the having small enemy. I don't want to mention the country name, but when we looking at the U.S. and the other big countries' competition race, maybe we can have another world from very different from now. And another scenario also has technically maybe half of young Korean conservative perspective on the US alliances, or another half of young Korean have a more liberal argue we don't need a US military alliance or something like that. So 50 is okay, right? When they became middle-aged men, and then another 50. But half of this 50 liberal guy still have the same mind. We need a rock US alliance, but we need to be more treated as an equal partner, right? So actually in this term, many people worry about pro-North Korean or anti-US young generation. They are not actually true. They are very small number of people only say just get out of US Army, or we don't need any kind of a rock US alliances based on the Cold War situation or something like that. So technically or politically, very small number of young Korean generations are about we don't need a rock US alliances. So I don't think it's a kind of too much worry about it. And I also make the argument that especially 2 years ago, Johns Hopkins size conference on the rock US alliance, I proposed another higher level of alliance. We can have two types of alliances. One is the more business interest between the two, or security common enemy issue. Maybe rock US alliance is now this level, but we need to upgrade this kind of level. Cultural amity, I call. More like share value, democracy and human rights, and share something special. Especially Korea is maybe very few success of American foreign policy to lead kind of democracy and economic development model, right? American foreign policy has a lot of examples, Iraq and Vietnam or Afghanistan or Libya, but not very successful. So to American people as well, Korea is very good model to make them proud of the American foreign policy, especially based on Wilsonianism perspective. They made a successful country in terms of economic development, also democracy model as well. So I think this is not just good for the Korean people in business way or economic interest way, or but also for American people it's very good country. So I always advise on Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially Public Diplomacy Division. We have to develop public diplomacy in the local level, exchange. And I'd like to always suggest kind of Israeli model. They are very good at top lobby as well, but at the same time, Israel always have a kind of a changing of local elementary school, high school, and all American children have to go I don't know, actually maybe there's some disagree with me, but they have kind of a lead kind of historical text on Holocaust, right? So even some ordinary American don't have any Jewish family, don't have any kind of experience to visit in Israel, but they mindset is if some Arab country invade Israel, we have to protect them. There's kind of consensus between the American people, whether they are liberal or I know some Yerushalayim book, Israel lobby, and some anti-Semitism controversy, especially in Britain. I know every story, but in the more like general level, we have to upgrade our alliance, not just to have a common enemy, but at the same time cultural level, sharing value or something like that. So this is a good opportunity, I think, not just challenge.
Good. John, what do you?
Sure. So, what are the implications for the U.S.-ROC alliance? That's a big source of debate, and I would group them, those who put forward the positive implications and the negative implications. So, for the core positive implications, you hear the view that with this new type of political relationship between the two Koreas, you would have a new type of view of the alliance. At the end of the day, for many analysts, the alliance is a policy tool. It's reflective of a broader strategy. If the political game plan here between the two Koreas is to have a different type of relationship where security concerns are very much lower in terms of a priority issue, the new type of relationship would lead to a type of alliance where South Korea would maintain its alliance structure, but without the type of use of the alliance in the past, which was to counter a North Korean threat. And I think if you look at it from budget analysis, for the South Korean side and the U.S. side to maintain that alliance structure, Combined Forces Command, there isn't a necessity from the South Korean side to boost military spending. So the more idea of reallocating resources to this idea of the grand vision laid out in the Panmunjom Declaration. The second positive implication is that maintaining the structure of the alliance, but retweaking the focus of it and the priority use of it is beneficial when it is the common threat perception related to China. And this is where the US, Japan, and the two Koreas have rare alignment. It's not perfect overlap, but you have some aspects of concentric circle. So that's another element that you're likely to see the perpetuation, the continuation of the alliance, but with the use and the positioning of the alliance in a different way. Now, in terms of the core negative implications, I think the biggest one right now is the suspension of military exercises for military planners on both the US and South Korean side. The concern is that you'll have a less capable fighting force. With mandatory military service in South Korea a little over 2 years and the different cycling in of US troops, missing a full year of military exercise has fundamental questions in terms of this jointness, the ability to do war fighting as two militaries. And so the final one I mentioned in terms of negative implication is from a Japanese perspective. Japanese security analysts and Japanese politicians are watching these developments on the Korean Peninsula through the lens of how it affects their security. And the concern is underpinning the US-South Korea alliance and the US-Japan alliance is the UN system. And so if there is a focus on all of these rapid changes, what do all of these developments mean for Japanese security? And from that perspective, the implications for the US-ROC alliance have a direct impact on the US-Japan alliance. And the idea of second-order effects here, I think you're going to see a type of situation where Japan and the United States are going to look almost in, not quite a zero-sum, but certainly as there's a declining aspect of interoperability and the idea of jointness on the US-ROC side, that the Japanese side would look to increase. So there are some fundamental changes going on in the security landscape as it starts to originate the Korean Peninsula. But I think as researchers, as analysts, we need to track how these are having the second-order effects elsewhere.
Okay.
Okay, let me
Yes.
let me add just one point. I think the U.S. and Korea both need strong alliances. Throughout the 5,000 years of history, as you know, we had more than 906 times invasion from mainland China and Japan, but we somehow survived. So we play so hard, against big guys like China and Russia, So that means, and also Korea is perfectly situated in the center of a regional rivalry. So the U.S. cannot just abandon the real value of the Korean Peninsula strategically. So they did a big critical mistake by declaring the Atchison Line in 1949, and U.S. paid a lot of what can I say, the sacrifice in the Korean War. They have a bad experience. So this time they don't have to lose. This opportunity. That's one thing, and then another one from the Korean perspective. So we still have to deal with the big guys like China, Japan, and other guys. So we need strong U.S. So even after the peace treaty and the unification, still we need it. In 2000, then President Kim Dae-jung visited China meeting with the President Hu Jintao, and Hu Jintao secretly talked to him. The China wants the U.S. troop to be continuously stay in Korean Peninsula even after reunification, because it's a balancer, it's the stabilizer for the regional stability. So there is a sense of consensus, So not just for it's not just for China, but also for Japan. Also, many Koreans believe, in that sense. So just by declaring the end of war against North Korea, the bilateral defense posture would not be weakened. So nobody believes that. So I want to stress on.
Okay. I mean, that's very reassuring coming from the Consul General. I'm sure it's aimed at a certain audience. I want to push Professor Kim a little bit more on the China thing, right?
I know
Tell
your
me
book,
more
yeah.
specifically. I mean, we all both of you, actually all three, have sort of hinted around about like, wow, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is China, et cetera, et cetera. And go ahead and tell me, I mean, is it really that much of a military threat to the peninsula? Is China, I mean, how do you view China in that sense then? I mean,
Chinese military is not actually immediate threat to Korean people. Maybe most of Korean people do not care. They are interested in expansion of Chinese defense budget, but at the same time, they don't think immediate threat, China invade us or kind of thing. But at the same time, we have a kind of feeling of victimization over the 5,000 years, right? So a lot of the invasion from China, so historical background, kind of collective identity among Korean people, including North Korea as well. So existence, and always when China strong, Korean people have a kind of difficulty. When China split several nations, we call 춘추 전국시대 kind of period, we always benefit from that. But I don't want to separate the Chinese nation. But anyway, so existence and historical background is a kind of a potential threat to Korea. And maybe you remember that issue, and China monster kind of thing happened to Lotte or the other area. So trade thing. So this is one example how much Korean people sensitive to the Chinese expansion militarily.
I mean, what I think is so interesting about Thet, and then I have a question for Dr. Park, is that China didn't really cut off trade relations. Thet is still there. And both sides found a face-saving way to move on. I mean, I think the Thet situation is a really intriguing example of how diplomacy works that was not extreme on either side. And China didn't get everything that it wanted, or at least what it claimed rhetorically it wanted, right? It's fascinating how Korea has a lot of ability to push back against a big China, even in these kind of situations, right? We can talk more about that in a minute, but I want to get to Dr. Park here to ask him about Japan, right? You're talking more about these second order effects of Japan, like, if Korea stops doing much, then Japan will go up. Isn't the conventional wisdom that Japan would go nuclear if North Korea went nuclear? And like, isn't North Korea nuclear now? Right? Like, I mean, really, are they gonna, like, how much more blatant does it have to be, right? Like, or is it that Japan, there's a lot of talk about what they might do, but the reality is they don't view going nuclear or even Abe. I mean, we're at peak Abe, and he's talking about, fairly limited, restrained militarization moves, right? So am I wrong on viewing Japan as not really reacting as much as we think it is? Or do they just have to, why?
So it's your definition.
Why aren't they nuclear?
Right. It's your definition of reaction. Clearly, from a lot of the literature and theories of nuclear proliferation, North Korea's current status as a nuclear weapon state, as it's in effect treated, would spark Japan going nuclear, and by that theory, South Korea going nuclear, and there's nuclear dominoes. But in terms of the reactions, as we've pieced together and interacting with Japanese analysts and Japanese policymakers on this topic, the focus more, I think, can be represented by saying of, don't let a good crisis go to waste. You know, they're able to do the joint operations on the naval side on a scale and scope that is still under the definition of self-defense, but is ever of a wider range and of greater capabilities. And it goes beyond the Korean Peninsula. So right now, as we speak right now, there is joint U.S.-Japan Self-Defense Maritime Force operation in the South China Sea. And so from that perspective, there's an effort on the Japanese side to increase their coordination, and it's taking place in a very practical, pragmatic manner. So as much as Prime Minister Abe is trying to lead an internal domestic movement towards revising the Constitution, in practice, he's doing a lot of the things that he's seeking to do. So I think this saying of don't let a good crisis go to waste is one way to view how the Japanese side, because of the concern of these direct threats that they perceive, those movements have changed a lot. But on the going nuclear side, the Japanese side, in our meetings with Japanese analysts, it's not a view of an automatic, it's just that they right now have other options that they are fully enjoying in terms of this type of cooperation. So for the time being, it seems that these areas of enhanced and bolstered cooperation are meeting some of those concerns.
Yeah.
All right.
Let me one.
Yes.
Actually, when I was working in Japan in 1997 to 1999, so in 1998, you know, the North Korea, you know, flew their Daepodong missile over Japan into Pacific Ocean. You know, everybody panicked. You know, everybody panicked. And
20
then,
years ago.
since then Prime Minister Koizumi prepared everything to be capable of, you know, the doing work. I mean, from the crippled country to normal country, you know, to perform war if it is needed. So they upgraded every regulations, you know, the allowing for the government to you know, what can I say, using private land, private sectors, you know, for further emergency cases. But there was no law at the time, but they updated. So because of the Daepodong missile, so Japan nearly became normal country, you know. And then under the current, you know, the nuclear regime, I don't think the Japan is going to nuclear country, but if it is needed in case of emergency or in case of war, so they can develop nuclear weapon within 6 months. So it's everybody's common sense, you know. They have more than 10,000 of plutonium reserved in Japan, on northern part of Japan. So if they decide, they can do it anytime, you know. So, but under the current normal status, I don't think Japan go nuclear. So that's you know, the international order. But the regional situation worsens, you know. Everybody go nuclear, North Korea, Taiwan, and everybody. Why not Japan?
Then they would.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, that's great. I think this has been really interesting. There's a lot of stuff on the table. We have, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so. Let's open it up to the crowd. I'd like to have a couple things. First, we'd like to emphasize students getting involved. And also, please keep your questions short. I reserve the right to interrupt if I have to, but I hope I don't have to. So, show of hands, Alan. Right behind you. We'll start with you, and then we'll go to Ellen. We'll go across. Yes. Yes.
So thank you for your excellent. So thank you very much for your excellent presentations. So actually, I'm an international student from China. Actually, Kim Jong-un has never visited China like before 2018, and the public at the beginning of the process thinking that the North Korea and China relations will stay the same, remain the same. But actually, why Kim Jong-un visited China so many times this year? And I'm also going to ask, like, what will be the role of China going to play in the future in the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Those are great questions. And tell us, what is your major?
Economics.
Pardon?
Economics. And
Okay. Great. Okay. Does anyone care to take that? Those are great questions. Like, why did Kim not go at all? And then did they suddenly repair their relationship? And,
Kim Jong-un is now kind of celebrity world superstar, right? And Kim Jong-un started his visibility not just regarding China, but Singapore, right? And he'll be in Seoul soon as well. So I don't think there is particular reason for Kim Jong-un not visiting before this year, because he has not visited any country anyway before the beginning of this year. So some people analyze why Kim Jong-un always visit China after some meeting with Moon Jae-in or with Trump. They say the raise kind of body price, right? Between the two, the Kim Il-sung strategy between the Soviet Union and China. You remember, as you know, Soviet conflict, Kim Il-sung always play double role. I'm your friend, each side, and now it's kind of insurance. If fail the negotiation with Trump, maybe China's still there. So some strategic thinker always said Korea, especially late 19th century, Koreans have to stay close with China and associate with Japan and ally with the US. This will be the good strategy for Korea. So maybe this rule is now to Kim Jong-un from my point of view. Stay close, intimate with China, because China very close, big country. But maybe he may try ally, I don't know, but some step closer to the international community, especially including US. I don't know Japan, but yeah, Kim Jong-un anyway now is kind of a double role, but I don't know exactly. When China and regarding Korean Peninsula issue, absolutely important.
Okay, let me answer to your question in two ways. You know, China is a consignee to Armistice Treaty in 1953, ending Korean War, together with the U.S. and North Korea, and that means when it comes to the nuclear issue, you know, always the China is a stakeholder, you know. And then right after he had a summit meeting with President Moon Jae-in and President Trump, so he has to play up his leverage, you know, before getting serious about it. And then another reason is a domestic reason, you know. So as a great leader, he has to show something to their people in North Korea. So in just 7 years after he got into power, he has to show his confidence in holding power there, and then as a great leader, he can lead the international, you know, the issues too, you know. So it's two reasons, I guess, internationally and internally.
I just quickly add, one of the key things that happened last year as we had the military escalation, China put forward this idea of dual freeze. If the United States and South Korea freeze their military exercises, North Korea freezes their nuclear ballistic missile testing. It didn't get much traction. You know, we just saw the military escalation grow and grow. And so in many respects, I think for China to somehow formalize this dual freeze is a priority. And that's in effect what we're seeing with the Moon administration's approach with their inter-Korean dynamic. So the interests aligned there, and I think from a perspective of Kim Jong-un meeting with Xi Jinping, from a Chinese perspective, they want to see more movement, deepening of this dual freeze and other elements to make it more durable. But the other element is that last year China implemented something called sectoral sanctions. They didn't purchase North Korean coal as mandated by UN Security Council resolution. China's been very consistent in saying that they would never implement US Treasury sanctions inside of China, but as a member of the United Nations, they will fulfill the letter of UN Security Council resolution. The sectoral ban was codified in a UN Security Council resolution. So from a North Korean perspective, a priority right now is getting sanctions relief and easing of sanctions. When I was in Beijing a few days ago with some senior colleagues, around that time, you had the first trilateral meeting, as one of my senior colleagues mentioned, which was very unique. This was among North Korea, China, and Russia. And as we heard the press release after, one of the primary focuses of this meeting was to get sanctions relief for North Korea, not in terms of a unilateral statement from the government of China or the government of Russia, but to get coordination and movement in the UN Security Council resolution system to recognize North Korea's movements along the denuclearization process and try to incentivize more. So there, I think, is a critical element of having a North Korea-China coordination piece on trying to get something done on the sanctions piece.
Great. Ellen.
Hi, my name is Ellen Kim. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at USC. My question goes to Professor Kim and Dr. Park. Given the latest news on the Korean Peninsula, yesterday that some news reports was saying that White House actually reached a couple of banks in South Korea to actually find out about what's going on, about their plans to. So I was wondering whether there's some kind of a policy problem with the policy coordination between Washington and Seoul.
John, why don't you
Sure.
start?
Yeah.
We'll go to-
I think at the working level, there are some gaps. And I think it's a function of the leadership of the respective countries, again, moving so quickly with political agreements without the consultation that normally goes into these summits. The working groups meet, they hammer out common understanding, there's a statement of principles, there's a lot of this type of preparation that goes into it, hence summits happen infrequently. And so we're having an inversion of that right now. But one of the things that does come out as these gaps arise, the summits seem to override the concerns about those gaps. And one of the interesting phenomena right now is whenever President Moon meets with Chairman Kim and has a summit, the interest level from the US side for President Trump to have a summit elevates a lot. And so right now, not to say that the only priority, but the top priority for the US side is to get the second Trump-Kim summit. And so I think this is a continuation of that observation that the political process is trumping the technical process. So these technical differences and concerns about policy coordination will continue, if not grow, but this is still a process that we observe being driven at the leader level.
Yeah, but my point is similar to John, and six party talk, we remember that each British channel have a kind of agreement to report to their boss, right, president, and if they disagree, they go to the another meeting, and the more time consuming because of this is not top leader meeting. So six party talk failed kind of their religion, but so everybody saying now evil exists in detail, right? So now it's a totally different way, right? That's why many people have to have a more positive view because top leader level have a kind of big agreement, and the other practitioner is kind of not very familiar with this kind of process because over the 2 decades, practitioner always kind of have a detailed plan to report their boss, and they have a NSC meeting, and then they agree, and then more time consuming because of here or other guy, Victor Cha, or kind of like doing this kind of process. But this is very new, right? And family way to make Trump-Kim summit or the other things. So everybody now is unexpecting happen every day. So as a practitioner and Mr. Kang has a kind of mentioning at the National Assembly yesterday or 2 days ago, and the kind of
You mean Minister
sanction.
Kang?
Yeah.
Our minister.
So yeah, kind of even inside of government we have kind of the conversation problem or sometimes the strategy communication to public as well, and inside Trump as well, right? John Bolton, Nikki Haley story, and there are some power game, and Pompeo called to Minister Kang with angry or something like that. Japanese newspaper release, and everybody concerned about it. But I don't think it's a very big issue because of the top leader agreement is more important than everyday small problem between the practitioner or even a minister level as well. So my view is similar to John.
We'll go right next to Ellen. There's another.
I think.
Who are you?
Okay. I am Sok Dong-Kim, PhD candidate at Claremont Graduate University. I also joined USC Korean Studies Institute student conference 3 years ago, and I think North Korea's decentralization and liberalization will eventually lead to North Korea's foreign policies, because previous economic sanctions and diplomatic repressions from relevant countries were not successful to lead to North Korea's denuclearization. Regarding international relations theory, balance of power between United States and China, or power transmission or hegemony by United States, or even maybe China would not lead to North Korea's satisfaction or agreement, or North Korea's regime guarantee. So, although it is very painful to expect North Korea's liberalization, but North Korea's economic reform will lead to liberalization and decentralization. So in that respect, rather than international relations perspective, when I focused on domestic politics, I eventually think that democratic peace theory and liberalization will lead to North Korea's denuclearization. What do you think about my perspective?
Great. Anyone? Great.
In terms of realist view or offensive realism or defensive realism, it's very difficult to imagine today's situation. But you're right, and I love David's book on the U.S.-China. It's also kind of the theory working on, right? U.S.-China peaceful competition rather than physical conflict. So yeah, yes, true. And also maybe you can mention about theory. The constructivist point of view, historical identity or historical experience is also important, or emotion also matter. So this situation is there, maybe difficult from the IR theory you mentioned already, the realistic point of view, power game, why US, China allow this situation. They don't want kind of unification between the two. Japan don't want strong Korea, unified Korea or something like that. But I agree with you, yeah, from this kind of a liberal point of view, it will be more have a more optimistic view on this situation. So yeah, that's a good point.
You know, there's an interesting phenomenon going on right now. The same event happens, the optimists become more optimistic, and the pessimists become more pessimistic.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so you have a current group of optimists believing that this is the breakthrough. We never got this far, and the road ahead is you're going to get to more goals much quicker. Pessimists are saying we've seen this again. This is another con job. It's just perpetrated by a different member of the Kim family. But this divergence is growing, and so the polarization is a quite striking feature. The only thing, though, in terms of the pessimists or the optimists, we'll only know after time passes by. But if certain agreements aren't met to the satisfaction of the parties involved and the deal collapses, we could default back to the types of arguments of why the agreed framework failed or the six-party talks collapsed. So this is a part where, tantalizingly for the optimists, I think we're getting into uncharted territory, and some of these events truly are different. But the forces from those two arguments, again, is kind of polarizing. Even the research that we try to do in an objective nature, those elements are very strong. And so sometimes you have to be very conscious to be objective and look at the factors and try to analyze what the intended and unintended consequences of certain actions are. But I expect this polarization to get much more intense.
I can't resist. I want to say one thing, and then we'll get one or two more questions before we end, which is the narratives that surround the Korean Peninsula don't necessarily track to actual history. And it came up here in little bits, and I like to point this out a lot, but I'm going to point it out here, which is the narrative on both sides of Korea is everything was fine until the Japanese came and ruined everything. Which is fine, I mean, there's an element of truth to it. But what I find so fascinating, and two interesting things about this, is of course, if China had not intervened in 1950, there would be a unified Korea under Southern rule. And that entire transformation of Korean history is not a part of Korea's narrative about the world. It's not, if only for those Chinese, we would be a unified country. That's not a part of the way anybody thinks about the peninsula. But it's absolutely true. If China had not interfered, they wouldn't. There would be a unified Korean peninsula. But that's not, we're still mad at Japan, right? Not China. In a way that's also interesting, and then we'll get on, because it's sparked by a number of these questions, but like, we don't know how the U.S. ROK alliance should expand or whatever else. But I find very interesting, the one different thing about China versus the United States, of course, is they went home, right? It's almost unthinkable in our narrative to consider the United States saying, we don't need this base anymore. It's almost impossible for us to conceive of that. Everywhere we go, man, we cling like grim death. Whoa, we're not leaving this base, right? There might be a rationale for it, there probably is, but it's really fascinating. China's like, not our country, man, we'll see you later. And so it's the way we construct narratives really has an impact.
Yeah, that's true. We are not the Philippines.
Yeah, right, I didn't kick them out, right? So it's very interesting. Anyway, I think we have time for probably about maybe one or two more. Is there? How about in the back, and then we'll go to the front. Yes, identify yourself, sir.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm also economics and math student here at USC.
Oh, interesting.
So, Dr. Park, you mentioned how there are optimists and pessimists. So, assuming everything goes well and the conversations don't stop and we keep on working the relationship between North Korea and South Korea, how soon do you think the international arena is going to be able to improve economic relationship with North Korea, whether it's lift the sanctions or initiate trade talks, or just including North Korea as a valid player who is capable of proving that they're capable of cooperating with the world?
So Max, first thing, you should abandon the economics math field. The great thing about North Korea analysis is the predictions if it doesn't happen in 5 years, you say in 10 years. If it doesn't happen in 10 years, it's gonna happen in 15 years. So I think there is that element here. If some of these developments don't pan out, it'll be a sense of we need more time, and you're gonna hear that for both sides. I think from a pessimist perspective, if the deal doesn't collapse in 5 years or 2 years, eventually it will. North Korea's we're gonna retain, the thesis is that North Korea will retain its nuclear weapons when certain economic development projects don't go according to their liking, or there's some internal change in North Korea. They'll revert back to what's called the Kim Jong-il playbook of using the nuclear program as a bargaining chip to get concessions. So everyone's waiting for constructed realities to happen. But in terms of the actual components related to the Panmunjom Declaration's statement of these transportation infrastructure projects, sanctions are the bottleneck right now, because there's a legality aspect. And so that's why there's such a big focus on the North Korean regime right now to get UN Security Council sanctions lifted in some way, shape, or form. And so if North Korea can do that, then it invites the possibility, as it's being discussed right now, and almost this idea of brainstorming. But if sanctions are lifted, from a Chinese perspective, there's nothing impeding them from applying Belt and Road Initiative funding or AIIB loans or any number of international organizations. And I think there are a number of European countries that are very sympathetic and supportive of some kind of reunification process. And so it's the lifting of the sanctions. And I would just say watch the space very closely in terms of what has been started in Moscow with this North Korea, China, Russia initiative. We'll see how far it gets, but that is a serious effort that is getting underway.
Great. Mr. Lee, and then we'll have a final question.
I came here to listen what's next for the Korean Peninsula. It might take 1 minute. I was the 7th grade. North Korean army came down and occupied Seoul in 3 days. Before that, Seungman Rhee and CIA said if North Korea bothers us, we'll go to invade North Korea. In 3 days, we'll occupy the Pyongyang. Can you?
Yeah.
President Trump may make a military threat to North Korea. If you do something, we'll just destroy. History repeats itself. So when I look at it, there's no conflict military solution by U.S. or China. Forget about it, because both sides will commit suicide anyway. So only way is culturally
religiously, economically, we have to get along whether we like it or not. I think that's the only step we can take for the Korean Peninsula. What do you say?
Great.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your gentleman, your opinion. And there's a very low possibility actually for the U.S. and China to militarily intervene the Korean Peninsula issue. Just good for them is just to let them to be in current state situation. That's why the President Moon Jae-in always make the argument our future in our hand. So we need to do something rather than just current status. So I think it's we have to support this kind of movement. Yeah, especially this is very different situation from the 1990 or 2000 because U.S. president now anyway looks like weird, but anyway supportive to the good situation. Also, Kim Jong-un is a little bit different anyway from Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung. He wants to do something as a young leader. So Moon Jae-in also has a kind of a reform mind. So this is a very good situation. So we need to use this kind of a golden opportunity to make Korean Peninsula world peaceful and prosperity.
John?
On the point of it's unthinkable of military force being used on the Korean Peninsula, that certainly wasn't the case last year. Kim Jong-un with his first ICBM test, intercontinental ballistic missile test, July 4th, then the second one July 28th, and then the third one November 30th. That changed the U.S. government's and the Trump administration's view of the North Korean threat. Before it was a threat over there, and the ICBM ranges were estimated to be able to, by the November 30th, the Hwasong 15, to be able to range the totality of the American homeland. And that's where automatically it became the focus of preparations for military action. No one threatens the American homeland is the way that Washington approaches it. And so last year, I think we'll hear more about the evidence of how far along these preparations went, how close we came to military action. But this is a type of situation that the security analysts say that isn't completely behind us. It could come up in the future again. And it's because of North Korea's ICBM capabilities. So right now, one way to view the Trump administration's metric of why the summit and negotiations between the United States and North Korea are successful is a very low bar of North Korea doing no testing on the ICBMs right now. And a big part of negotiations between the United States and North Korea, that North Korea will start dismantling their ICBM capabilities. So it's that element that I think is different from previous negotiations with North Korea.
Maybe one final question, briefly, and then we will conclude. And I have a couple things, yes.
My name is Won-ho Kim, community member of Korean Study Institute, directed by Professor Dr. David Kang. I would like to raise a question to Honorable Consulate General Kim. But you two professors answered my question. But I'm 70 kind of years old, old generation. I'm just worried about current situation of Korea, current regime. I mean, President Moon Jae-in is dramatically approached the unification and peace in Korea. I'm worried about. I'm thinking of the Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam Peninsula. He said, even I die, this Vietnam is going to be unified by communist idea. So I don't know whether Mr. Kim Jong-un, he is put his emphasis on the economy, as he said at the January 1st of this year. But in his mind, he probably has the, I'm going to unify the Korean Peninsula by communist or socialist ideology. even though the unification cannot be done within let's say a couple of years or 5 years, but Moon Jae-in president is doing very aggressively approach those kind of idea. Mr. Kim, do you think Mr. Kim Jong-un is hiding his intention to unify the Korean Peninsula by communist idea? Because I'm the old generation, I'm very worried about those kind of stuff because
Okay, let me just cut you off. I think that's a great question. I think that's perfect. So if we can just move on because we're running out of time. So I'll just turn it over to the Consulate General to answer whether.
please comment on the
yes.
Juche ideology study group people in Moon Jae-in regime.
Thank you.
very much.
Yeah, I think everyone may harbor doubt, on Mr. Kim's real intention, but everybody agree. I think, the coexistence, peaceful coexistence, is much better than the confrontation. So there was a lot of the military agreement to diffuse tension on the peninsula. With regard to DMZ and the Sea of Korea, Donghae, and Sea of West. I think it will dramatically, de-escalate the tension on the peninsula, and then it will be a good environment for the U.S. and North Korea summit to be held in a near future. But when we the ease tension, international tension, together with the China and other countries, so there will be the complete coordination, not just with the U.S. but also